Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr. Vincent Esposito, and today we're going to be talking about food prep techniques. So the basics on how to cook, and we're also going to talk about if you're completely plant-based, if you're vegan, how do you get all the protein you need? So before we get to that, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe below. I'm coming out with videos twice a week, everything health, nutrition, wellness, longevity, and plant-based cooking. So if you're interested in anything like that, please subscribe below. I hope you find the information helpful. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this video in particular is because it took me a good, I want to say 2 years before I really figured out kind of all the basics of cooking and how to put together anything kind of using what you have. And what we're going to go over in this video today are really the basic techniques to make most dishes. So if you can get most of these down, you're gonna know how to cook like 90% of dishes without the need for a lot of extra ingredients or extra utensils or kitchen appliances that you might not necessarily have. So let's go over it now. So naturally, when we're talking about cooking techniques, we're gonna start with one where you're not doing any cooking at all, and that's just simply raw foods. Now, particularly when it comes to fruits and vegetables, a lot of raw foods are great because they maintain and keep their nutrient content, especially when they're raw. Now, some of that changes when you cook it or lightly cook it, and we could talk about that as we're going. But sometimes having raw foods is the best case, especially with for most fruits and vegetables. Now, the trick is if you're having some sort of digestive issues or you don't eat a lot of fiber, especially right now, eating a lot of raw foods, especially initially, might be tough to digest. So I might suggest maybe lightly sauteing or stir frying something just to help break it down a little bit, especially in those early stages, and we'll get to that. But that's kind of where I fall on raw food. So the first real cooking technique we're gonna go over is boiling. Now, boiling is simply setting a pot of water or liquid to a boil. You're gonna set it on high heat and release it. Now, if you are gonna cook vegetables or something like that, the problem with this is that many of the nutrients leach into the water, and unless you're using that water for, say, like soup or a stock or something like that, you're gonna lose a lot of that in the water. Now, it will cook, they will get softened, and they will be more edible, but you might be done at the loss of nutrient content. Now, personally, I hate eating boiled vegetables. I never do it. The exception to that is when I make homemade stocks in my crock pot back there. The next technique is steaming, and it is similar to boiling in that you're gonna get that softened texture that personally I hate. Again, if you like that, all the power to you. But it's gonna consist of setting a pot of boiling water on a stove, and then you're gonna have some sort of mesh basket that you can put on top, but not in the water, and then you cover it. Now, the steam that comes up from the boiling water is gonna cook the vegetables and soften them over time. Now, the reason why this is preferable to boiling is you're not gonna lose as many nutrients in the cooking process to the water. They're gonna be retained in the fruits and vegetables themselves. Now, similar to boiling, in my opinion, I personally hate the soft texture, so this is another technique that I rarely use. The next technique is one of my favorites, and that's stir frying or sauteing. So that's gonna be taking a pan, you're gonna put it over usually somewhere between medium and medium high heat. You're gonna add a little bit of olive oil, or really any oil of your choosing. I stick to usually olive oil, coconut oil, or avocado oil. Those are the primary three I use. Once that gets hot, you can put your vegetables or food on the pan, and you're gonna saute them for as long as until really they're tender. Now, the nice thing about sauteing and stir frying is that these nutrients get sealed in during the cooking process, and it also softens the outer layer of fiber, making the fruits and vegetables or beans, legumes, whatever you're sauteing, a little softer and therefore a little bit easier to digest. And personally, I also love the flavor, and this is really one of my favorite ways to cook. The next one I don't use a ton, but it is useful in certain situations, and that is broiling. So if you don't know this, if you have an oven at home, on the top of the oven, inside the oven, there is sort of a heating plate. That is actually your broiler. So when you're broiling something, it's actually shooting heat kind of down onto your food. And if you are gonna broil something, you're gonna wanna put it on the top rack. Now, generally broiling is used for for browning. That's not necessarily something I do a ton, so I don't use the broiler a ton. But the nice part is it doesn't affect the nutrient content too much, and you don't need a lot of oil. Now, along with sauteing, roasting is probably my other favorite way to prepare foods, and this also uses the oven. If you are gonna roast or bake something, you definitely wanna preheat your oven ahead of time so that you make sure those cooking times are accurate. Now, when you're looking at a recipe, be aware that your cooking times might be a little bit off. Again, every oven's a little different. I use like 3 ovens on a regular basis depending on where I'm at and cooking out of, and they all act a little differently. So if you are using a recipe that says to say put something at 375 for say like 20 minutes, keep an eye on it somewhere between like 15 and 25. Again, just because each oven's a little different, some heat might get out, and something to be aware of. Now, roasting could potentially limit some of the water-soluble nutrients. They kind of leach out during the cooking process, but also it makes some nutrients more readily available. So there's a little bit of a give and take with roasting. The next technique is straight up frying, and this is one I rarely use. One of the reasons why is because of the poor quality of fats during the frying process. So even if you use a high quality fat, the idea is if it's heated for a long period of time, those fats begin to denature and could cause health issues once we consume them. So that's really the big reason why frying is definitely not ideal from a health perspective. Now, when you fry foods as well, it also reduces the nutrient content of whatever food in question. So not only are you getting bad fats due to the actual frying, you're also losing nutrient content. And that's why it's not one of my favorite ways to cook, and another thing I rarely, if ever, use. The final cooking technique is actually pickling or fermenting foods. Now, if you ever had sauerkraut or miso or kimchi or anything like that, these are all fermented foods. And generally these techniques were developed to preserve food in times when food was scarce. Now, one of the big benefits of eating foods that have been pickled or fermented is consuming probiotics, which are good for your overall gut health. And these come about due to the fermenting process. These good bacteria strains actually become incorporated in those foods, and the reason why they break down and are able to last much longer. So you actually get some good gut bacteria along with the enhanced vitamin and mineral content and nutrient content in some cases, depending on what you're fermenting. Now, most pickling or fermentation processes usually contain a lot of glassware, a lot of water, and obviously fresh vegetables. Now, the preparations, depending on what you're doing, vary a little bit. So I don't want to get into how to pickle or ferment specific things because they're all slightly different. There's tons of different YouTube videos on how to pickle or ferment something if you're interested. I know what's held me back from doing a lot of it is just not having the glassware to do it. So if you do have glassware and it's something you're willing to try at home, definitely consider trying it. And guys, listen, those are the basic techniques to cooking. So again, there's only about 6 or 7 different things, and you can make probably more than 90% of the dishes out there. It's just a question of learning cook times for different ingredients, and that just comes with experience. But as you can see, like, anyone can do this stuff at home. It's just, do you know how to stir fry? Do you know how to bake? Do you know how to roast? And can you chop properly? Knife skills are another big key, but that's not necessarily cooking in itself. With that said, that comes with time as well. So I hope you kind of got something from learning about these different cooking techniques, and more importantly, how simple it could be if you just keep things simple and use these techniques. Now, one of the big things that I get, and I know I'm not alone in this, is if you want to go more plant-based, where do you get your protein from? And what I will list on the left here are a bunch of different combinations that allow you to get all the essential amino acids you need. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. It's just kind of to give you an idea of where to get started. And all these combinations are fairly easy to combine. Again, you could roast and stir fry and do a bunch of different things with these. So try different combinations out and see which ones that you like. The other big question, and more important question in my opinion, is how do you make any of this stuff taste good, especially if it's things you've never cooked with before? So I'm gonna go over a couple tips real quick to get those kind of plant-based dishes to get all the flavor that you're looking for. So one of the reasons I don't like steaming or boiling vegetables is that it takes out a lot of flavor, and they tend to be served just as a steamed or boiled vegetable. Now, well, if that is something you want to try drizzling some olive oil and salt once you finish cooking them to add a little bit of flavor on the back end. Now, one of my favorite parts about cooking is the ability to use different combinations of herbs and spices. Now, on a whole, they tend to have a high antioxidant content, which is great, but they also pack a bunch of flavor. Now, this is something that I will continue to kind of expand upon as I get older and cook more, is try to use different herbs and spices together and kind of come up with different combinations. But it's an awesome way to make dishes more nutritious and taste a whole lot better. Now, if you happen to listen to The Art of Eating at any point, we give away recipes every week. And if you've ever heard me talk about recipes, 90 to 95% of the time they start with garlic and onions. So if you are sauteing something or stir frying something, just start it with garlic and onions of any kind, and you will add not only a ton of flavor, but get a bunch of benefits from the antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects of both garlic and onions. So get as much garlic and onions as you can if you like the flavor. Definitely saute it with them. The last tip for today is, if you have a slow cooker, take advantage of it, especially if you're busy. It's a great way to make things in bulk, especially things like soups and stews or chilies, things for one night that you could do in bulk, one dishes or one meal dishes. Slow cookers are awesome, and they will seal in all the nutrients, because again, if there is a liquid, it's all gonna be in that dish, whatever you're preparing. So take advantage of the slow cooker if you can. And it's great for meal prepping and bulking as well. So use the slow cooker. And so those are kind of the basics of cooking and some tips to kind of get you started on more of a plant-based approach. So I hope you enjoyed the information today. Again, if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Let's have a discussion. I'd love to answer any questions there. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. Coming out with videos twice a week, everything nutrition, health, wellness, longevity, and plant-based recipes. So if you're interested in any of that, there will be information coming for the foreseeable future. But until then, take care, guys.